Welcome to the moment that changed everything, where we interview notable creative people to gain insights into how they got started and learn more about the moments that shaped them and their careers. Today we sit down with national treasure Rick Hansen. Rick became a hero to those with disabilities and an inspiration to the world when he embarked on his famous Man in Motion World Tour. Inspired by Terry Fox, he not only crossed Canada in a wheelchair, he crossed the entire globe to demonstrate the limitless potential of those with disabilities. Before becoming a household name, Rick represented Canada in the 1980 and 1984 Paralympic Games, winning 3 gold, 2 silver, and 1 bronze medal. Today, he is founder of the Rick Hansen Foundation, an organization that has raised over $360 million and has delivered programs that have heightened awareness, changed attitudes, and improved the quality of life for people with disabilities. In 2006, he was inducted into Canada's Sports Hall of Fame. In this episode, we catch up with Rick in his hometown of Vancouver to talk about who inspired him to see the positive side after his devastating accident, his relationship with Canadian legend Terry Fox, and the amazing story of how he became the inspiration behind the top 80s song, St. Elmo's Fire. Rick Hansen, thanks so much for being on the podcast. I want to say first off that it's an absolute pleasure to talk to you today. 2 years ago, I had the opportunity to work on a project, the Einstein Legacy Project, and we got to get on a phone call with you because you were creating your submission for the Einstein book, 100 Visions of the Future, and you had a submission in that book. I got off that phone call and I was just so enamored by how down to earth you are. And now, 2 years later, I get to get on a podcast here and share with our audience that exact experience I had. I guess my first question for you would be, where did you get your values from, and who taught you to be so gracious and humble in your success?
Well, it's a real pleasure having a chance to connect again, and thanks for including me in your ongoing podcasts. And it's an honor to share stories, and we all have our own unique stories, and I think that by sharing stories we build bridges and remind ourselves of the simplest but most important things. And values are a huge part of our compass and an evolving process. But for me, my greatest sense of values came from growing up as a youngster, surrounded by family, uncles, aunts, cousins, grandparents, and you quickly learned that you had a sense of responsibility, and learned also to be able to understand that you were not the only person in the world, and that we're part of a collective. And I think that extended through my parents by being like this kind of open house. The kids would always come over to the neighborhood and play. We were all introduced clearly to rules, and knew when we went over the other side and were held accountable. And at the same time, we were also being neighborly, because when people had challenges or needed support, kids would come over to stay overnight or room at our place. When they were coming from ranching communities in the Caribou, they had a place to stay, and a family that was extended. And I think that value system, embedded into my world. And I'll never forget one of the comments that my dad made when I was about ready to embark on my journey is, remember who you are, and remember where you came from, because that's your compass. And it doesn't mean that you're rooted in history, but don't lose yourself no matter what happens. And that was an important thing, because with the enormity of celebrity status or attention towards the journey, it would have been easy to lose yourself and think somehow that you're important, and beyond any other individual, lose respect for others, or no matter what level of status and hierarchy, that people are people, and they should be loved, honored, and respected accordingly. And so I think that was a big part of my growing up, and just been continuing to work on that and refine that, because it's never 100% static either. It's a learning process as we go.
Yeah, you mentioned the word journey, and I think everybody can identify with that. And when we talked specifically about your journey, I wanted to bring up one of the questions on our phone call 2 years ago, and we explored a number of themes. We asked one question. I want to re-ask this question because I thought your answer was so great, and that was we posed to you whether or not you thought that you would have been on the same path or enjoyed some of the success you've had in your life if you hadn't had gotten into the accident at a young age and had to learn how to deal with those types of things. So I'll pose that question again and have you answer.
Yeah, I hope I answer it the same way. And the reality is that when I was young, I believed that anything was possible. I was involved in so many different things at the age of 15, had crazy ideas and dreams about maybe representing my country at the Olympic Games, and also becoming a phys ed teacher or a coach. So I was on that track of wanting to pay it forward and share some of the lessons and experiences that I had through athletics and at school. And then the accident happened. But I think before that, maybe I was maybe oriented towards being able to flirt with a lot of different levels of success. And when things got tough, I could reframe quickly and move on to something else. I was never really forged in the philosophy that anything is possible, but not everything. And the accident was like this gauntlet, and I had to focus on my reality with incredible intensity because the outcome could dictate the rest of my life. And there were kind of two processes. One is that I was fixated on my loss and what I couldn't do, or I was able to perhaps retool by learning about new possibilities, reframing, and still focus on who I was and what I aspired to achieve. And I believe that that gave me a sense of resiliency and determination, and to know the difference between anything and not everything and being possible, and focus being the key. And I was able to apply that in my sport as I regained my focus and realized that Paralympic sport was part of my possibilities. And nowhere in the definition of an athlete does it say you have to use your legs in order to be one. And then to be able to apply that again to the next phase of my life, which is how do I pay it forward, and embarking on this Man in Motion World Tour. So I believe that while I still would have been in the service agenda and in coaching and teaching, but if I hadn't had the accident, number one, I probably wouldn't have had the incredible experiences, the richness of the global journey of viewpoint, and the ability to contribute, people I've met, relationships, lessons learned. And secondly, I think that the ability to keep reframing, I would have maybe always looked over my shoulder wondering how far could I have gone in my sport, or in my career, or and I think that might have been the defining difference between the two realities. And when I look back at it now, I feel not like a victim of the accident. I feel like one of the luckiest people on the planet. And I've clearly learned that the accident was one of the greatest things that ever happened to me, my defining moment in my life.
Let's talk a little bit about mentorship because you know, this wasn't a solo journey for you. I know that you had some strong influences in your life, particularly as it relates to this attitude of looking at this as that it could be a positive experience. So, who was it in your life that kind of helped you through this journey specifically?
Yeah, as I mentioned, obviously family were super important and always there for me, not too overbearing, not too removed, but just walking that right line and helping me kind of try to figure it out, and then figuring it out with me. But in order to paint that new canvas, turn it into a dark black slate of despair, to put colors into it and texture and borders of hope and possibilities, I needed role models, real people. Like, for instance, Stan Strong was one of the first surviving people with spinal cord injury. He was injured in the 30s. that was before people were supposed to survive. And so they wrote him off, and he spent 4 years in a hospital, no rehabilitation centers. He kept surviving and surviving, and then he emerged from the hospital into a foreign world that was completely filled with barriers everywhere. And yet somehow Stan managed to hang on to this sense of hope and meaning, and he carved a sense of purpose and a wholeness of life in spite of all the things that had happened to him. His first wife left him. He had no jobs, no careers, and yet he managed to then go and live a life of service through the Canadian Paraplegic Association and Canadian Wheelchair Sport Association. And Stan kind of drove into my life in this flashy red convertible with a big smile. And at first, I kind of thought he was a bit of a pervert when I was walking between classes, and he called me over to his convertible, and he introduced himself, and then he told me that he was not only a peer counselor there to support, but he was also the team manager of the Vancouver Cable Cars wheelchair basketball team, and he wanted to recruit me to come out and play with the cable cars. And Stan Strong, as I got to know him, not only was he a tremendous advocate for helping remove barriers in my life so I could go to university, I could actually get re-engaged in sport, help funding support, but he was also leading by example. Every time I saw him, he had this sense of lightness, this love and purpose in his life. I never saw him like burdened, and I went, my God, how does he do that? And what I came to realize is that it was the mindfulness of his space that he had the control over, not of what happened to him, but how he viewed it and where he chose to place his attention, which was always in the possibility, always in the strength, always in honoring the purpose, and always seeing the meaning in every day that was totally in his control. Yeah, and I just thought, well, hey, if he can do it, I can, and it helped propel me forward. And Stan was just an incredible role model and mentor, and I thought that's what I want to do. And not the same way, but and so I used that in the way in which I went forward with sport, and I really saw, everything that was possible. I met some unbelievable people in that Vancouver Cable Cars team that he introduced me to. And when I was kind of wondering about the quality of the athletes, I met Eugene Reimer, Canada's Outstanding Male Athlete of the Year in '72, along with Karen Magnuson, the female athlete. And he was a big, strong, and powerful guy. And Peter Calistro is an all-world wheelchair basketball player, and just wheeled circles around me, and was a magician, a Michael Jordan of the game. And then I was asked by Stan to keep recruiting, and I was able to run into a friend who introduced me to Terry Fox. And so you can imagine, like how amazing that was for a young kid like me coming from Williams Lake, surrounded by these incredible people, human beings that just kind of challenged you, inspired you, and opened you up to a whole new life. And I am so grateful for Stan and all that he did in my life to help point me in that direction of possibility.
Yeah, I mean, here we are talking about inspiring figures in your life. Of course, Terry Fox, an absolute legend like you, and I think I was maybe 10 years old in 1980, and I remember seeing the news coverage of his cross-country run, the Marathon of Hope, and not knowing at the time just what an impact that would make on the country and the culture. And I know that was something that inspired you to then, go out on your Man in Motion tour, which was, again, legendary, such an impact on the country and real national pride. So tell us about that time in your life. I mean, I know that you just mentioned you met Terry and introduced by a friend, but tell us a little bit more about how you went from meeting him, being inspired by what he had done, and then going out on your own and doing your legendary tour.
Well, Terry, like me, was inspired at a time when he was struggling to put it all together. He just lost his leg. He used to be an athlete, a basketball player, a track guy from Simon Fraser University, and uh, and and he came out and he was introduced to Stan and this team, and people had way more disabling conditions, but yet exuded nothing but ability. And he was nurtured in that culture. He was inspired by another amputee who did a marathon. And the next thing you know, he's paying it forward in an area that he cares about deeply, that he's experienced, which is the pain and suffering of cancer. And so he combined something that he was engaged in, and he ended up applying it with purpose, tried to run across the country and help cure cancer. And his Marathon of Hope was an amazing endeavor of how everyone who has a desire to make a difference can play a role, whether they're a team member or they lead out in something new and courageous like Terry. And Terry, when we were driving back from the wheelchair basketball tournament, we were in my little green Honda on a rainy November evening, and had talked about everything under the sun, and then everything got a little quiet. And I could tell he was kind of like, like kind of getting the courage up to sort of lay something out there. And he says, so Rick, I'm going to talk to you about something I've been thinking about, and I want to get your feedback. What do you think? I'm thinking about running across the country to raise money for cancer research. And I just went, wow, what an incredible dream. And, do you think I can do it? And I said, of course you can do it. Physically, I know how able you are, and I know how determined you are, how mentally strong you are. So my only question is, can you get the team in place to make it worthy of making a difference? Can you actually get supported to get your message out there? I hope you've got the great team there, because let's put that into results. And clearly, all of us were cheering for him, and as his journey was unfolding, he had a huge impact and was building such momentum. And what I saw in his journey that was not part of his purpose, but part of the journey that I'd been on all along, which was to recognize that when you have a disability, there's two battles that you're fighting right from the beginning. Your own internal battle about your attitude and your sense of hope and possibilities for the quality of your life and your potential, and then the battle of trying to shift society and its biases towards seeing you not with pity, but with ability and with wholeness, and some of the institutional barriers that just don't have to be there, the handicaps. And so I saw that coming out when people were talking about Terry's journey. They were saying, wow, I never knew someone with, an amputation, could actually do so much. It's changed my view of people with disabilities, and it permeated through. And as I was looking at this dream of wheeling around the world as an adventure, a physical challenge, which I'd had since I was in the rehab center, and thinking of Stan's challenge of paying it forward, I decided to connect it with a purpose. And eventually, a number of years later, got to the point where I was able to have the courage to utter those first words, like Terry did in that green Honda, to my coach and to some of my key friends and family. And once it's out, you're committed, and that was the beginning of my journey.
I mean, we got to stick with the Man in Motion tour, and because I got a couple more questions here. One is sort of like a sidestep. I'm going to pause here and talk about something specific, and that is the tour song, St. Elmo's Fire. I mean, for anyone watching and listening right now, here I'll just give you the quick beats, and then I'm going to ask you if it's all true. But as I understand it, David Foster, the famed Hollywood composer, fellow Canadian, and singer John Parr were commissioned to write the theme song for the movie St. Elmo's Fire, starring Rob Lowe and that whole group of Hollywood actors. And he was struggling to find something. And legend has it that Foster shared some news clippings of your tour. And Parr became so inspired by it that he ended up penning the song St. Elmo's Fire in less than 24 hours. So my question to you is, talk to us a little bit about how you learned about all that stuff and whether or not it all sounds so tidy as I've kind of described it.
Yeah, again, it's like everything, it starts with intention. When we were organizing the tour, one of the crazy dreams and out there ideas was that we would actually inspire someone to write a theme song. And wow, wouldn't it be great if it became a #1 hit, and it would help promote our journey, etc. And so we were at a pre-tour fundraiser at the Denman Racket Club with one of the participants, Terry David Mulligan, a Canadian icon who is a DJ and an actor and community leader. And Terry said at the end of our evening, he said, "Rick, you've got to get a song out there, man." And I said, "I'd love to, but who would we call?" And he goes, "You should talk to David Foster." I go, "Who's he? I've never heard of him." And he goes, "You don't know David? Wow, wow." He went on to tell me all of his incredible talent and accomplishment. And I said, "Perfect." I said, "How do we do it?" He said, "Send me that promo video you showed here at the event, and I'll get it to David, and who knows?" And I sent it to him, and Terry sent it to David, and obviously the next day it was all about the urgency of just starting our journey. And all those months later, next thing you know, we were wheeling down the West Coast and into California, and David called the office and said, I've been inspired by Rick's journey, and I want to meet." And so he met us in LA and started to play the nucleus of the music that he was working on. And next thing you know, we end up hearing the song. And what David went on to say is that he and John they didn't like the movie, they weren't inspired by it, they were stuck, and they had the music, but they didn't have the lyrics. And they put the video on, and all of a sudden the goosebumps went rolling over John Parr's arms and the back of his neck, and all the words rolled out, and it was all about our journey. Not really about the movie. And so, but it was also parallel on a similar theme. So the reality is that it followed us all around the world, and we have an intention, and if good things happen, people like Terry David Mulligan, David, and John, sometimes dreams come true.
Amazing story. Amazing. You recently celebrated your 30-year anniversary of that tour, that Man in Motion tour. And of course, it coincided with you giving your private collection to the Canadian Museum of History. And that collection includes 1,700 artifacts, as I understand it, thousands of behind-the-scenes videos, photographs, and of course, the wheelchair that you ended up using as you crossed the world. So I was going to ask you, what's that like? What's that like, donating your stuff to a museum? I mean, does that feel weird, given, being immortalized while you're alive?
So it was really, it was an honor that they approached me with this notion, and we talked about it, and they said that they wanted it to be not just a historic legacy, but a reminder of the ongoing journey to be able to make the world accessible and inclusive for people with disabilities, and also finding a cure for paralysis. And I guess when I heard that, I went, "Wow, this is incredible," because we've just been sort of storing these artifacts in a warehouse and not knowing what to do with them. And it made sense that that we would actually provide it to them, and they put it all together. They've been so encouraging and supportive, and putting the time. But one piece that we talked about is that this is not a Rick Hansen museum thing. This is a Man in Motion World Tour tribute to the power of community. And all the things that we're talking about here is one person leading, but an incredible team of people working together, each person putting their magic in some way to help it become the legacy that it was, and the beginning of a movement that it became. And so it's not over, and the Canadian journey is still unfolding, and I'm honored that tribute to so many people, so that hopefully young people who come there, who maybe weren't around during that era, not only are they inspired about the values and the mission, but maybe they have goals and dreams or are dealing with obstacles too, and they're looking for inspiration and they can apply it, just as Terry and I were in our own ways. And so there's a whole lot of Terry Foxes and Rick Hansens out there, just waiting for dreams to unfold, and the encouragement to try and to believe that they can assemble their team too. So I'm super honored about it, and look forward to the day that it becomes the display that it is. And just maybe there'll be a virtual museum that people don't have to go to Ottawa to see it. They can see it anywhere around the world. Yeah.
Amazing, amazing, and I wanna touch on, you're someone who's involved in spinal cord research and just what is possible. I mean, I'll share the quick story of you in Montreal speaking at the Celebrating a Century of Genius weekend, and of course, this was a weekend that was honoring the centennial of Einstein's theory of relativity. You spoke at that event, and at one point you talked about having a vision in the future of perhaps someone in Nepal, perhaps a Sherpa, climbing Mount Everest. Someone with a spinal cord injury finally doing that. And when I heard that, I felt like I want to be in Rick's mind, knowing everything that he knows about it, because I think the public at large, we look at accessibility and we have a very unidimensional view of what that is. When you talked about that specifically, what was that vision in your mind, and what's going on in terms of innovation and spinal cord research?
Well, I think the reality is, as we try to work towards a world that's accessible and inclusive for people with disabilities and a cure for paralysis, there's going to be milestones and baby steps along the way. It's an ultra marathon of social change for two of those big dreams, and it's going to be anchored by new thresholds of possibilities that will infuse energy and excitement and galvanize the world around the continuing journey. And the best way to do that is to inspire and empower those other individuals who have the ability to go where no one has even imagined that a person with a disability can go, to show possibilities, to inspire and pay it forward. And people in Nepal have been working tirelessly as support team members in the background, helping others to achieve their personal goals by summiting Everest. And there's sort of some serious tragedy and trauma that has happened in Nepal for various reasons, including the recent earthquake. And I'm sure there's right now a former Sherpa who's had a spinal injury, who has incredible drive and skill and talent that could be inspired and encouraged and supported by the global community of climbers who have benefited from the Sherpa excellence, and that they could help a Sherpa actually break a new threshold and frontier by summiting Mount Everest and pulling together the technology on the ropes to be able to climb through the sled and the machine to be able to roll up through the rocks and even go vertical, and to be able to have the mountain cleared for this purpose and have everybody there to help support this person to summit and then to descend safely, and have that radiate around the world and make people realize, oh my gosh, I had no idea. And I know that will happen one day, and I know that there's the technology, I know there's the people with the climbing expertise, and I know that there's probably people with spinal injury who have the skill and the desire. And so all that can come together and break down another threshold of possibility and just keep us going and energized for the next few decades. And then from there, well, then it's space. There is no question that someone with a spinal cord injury will leave the wheelchair behind to go up into space, to be on the space station and circumnavigate the world multiple times in a day, broadcasting to billions of people on the planet that there are no barriers on this earth or beyond that can't be crossed by humans once they set their minds to it, that anything's possible. In space is our future. Just talk to Elon Musk and others, Richard Branson, and so many others, that it would be inappropriate for us to not make sure that it too was accessible for people with disabilities to show that they can contribute as well.
You've been building your legacy for so long, and I have to know, has it always been a clear path for you in terms of your vision, or, and you mentioned earlier that journeys are a work in progress, but when did you get clear on this, and tell us a little bit about how it's evolving.
Yeah, it's never a straight line. It's definitely a lot of ups and downs, and no matter how together you are in a moment, there's always those dark sides where you're feeling moments of despair, confusion, not wondering whether you're on the right path, and and I think it's in those periods that you kind of get anchored back to your compass, and but stay growing, because if we stay anchored in the past, we can somehow miss those greatest moments as we evolve in our the application of our skills, the interests and the passions that draw and call to us. And for me, I care deeply about a healthy and inclusive world. And I've traveled the world, and I know that human beings they have an innate desire to be healthy, that they have an innate desire to accept everyone in spite of their differences as equal, and be included in with all the rights and freedoms of any other human being. And I also know that we can't survive without considering this planet and ensuring that it is healthy and sustainable for the future. And so that's what I do in my own world, and I do it in different ways, but I try to stay true to that. And I've always held that view of health in curing paralysis, and yet living whole in spite of the fact you still have a disability. And I've evolved into the reality that we also live on this planet, and we have a responsibility to keep it healthy too. So that's kind of the wholeness of who I am today. And maybe 35 years ago, it was a little bit narrower, but that's been my journey, and I'm trying my best to express that as I go along.
I want to ask you about what you're hyper focused on right now. What are the specifics of something that you're excited? I mean, I've been excited to talk to you for the last several weeks, so that's what I've been focused on. But I would love to know specifically what you'd like to see come to pass in the near future.
I think the first thing is back to the core forever. It'll be my view of how do I build an accessible and inclusive world for people with disabilities. How can I be part of the movement? And number one is awareness that disability is such a big deal. Most people don't really realize that it affects 1.3 billion people on the planet today, and that it's growing exponentially with aging baby boomers and their parents. And so it's not only a charity issue, it's not only a human rights issue, it's an economic and cultural imperative. And if we don't make it our focus top of mind, we're going to continually struggle to allow everybody to be part of the human journey and to contribute as much as to benefit. And I guess within that, then, if there's one big barrier that I think is still out there, and it's shocking to think that it's still in today's world not normalized, and that is, the places and spaces that people live, work, learn, and play are still not constructed, with that sense of universal and inclusive design, the most benefit for the most people. There's a lot of old archaic views. Architects, engineers, city planners, developers, and even advocates are all kind of fragmented and not really normalized in what is a best practice curriculum and metric to be able to get upstream and have every building being built always come through the system with the best possible outcomes, and minimize the angst, anxiety, the disappointment, and then the retrofitting energy to then go back again at a cost that's exponential of refurbishing to make it right in the first place. And so we're actually introducing an accreditation and certification system. It's very much like LEEDs in energy efficient buildings around the world. And we think that buildings are built for people. Energy is important, but for people, why not make sure that for people with disabilities that People are accredited because they've got the appropriate training and credentials to actually get it right. And then we can measure and certify what buildings actually meet the minimum, and even more importantly, really incent those gold levels of certification to point the innovation and the focus for the future about cool ideas and ways that that we can make things accessible and they're still cost effective, functional, safe, and maintain maximum value along the way. So that's going to be a movement-based solution that will impact 250,000 accredited professionals, and eventually we'll have every building on the planet rated. And if someone wants to know how accessible Toronto is, or Vancouver, or Canada versus another country, you just have to look at the metrics and you'll be able to see, and inspire people to keep going.
Amazing. Listen, I usually start these things, and we did kind of before we started recording about talking about the pandemic, and here we are during this time, and you have a lot of people who've been confined to their homes longer than they would have liked, and people are getting a bit antsy and feeling like their freedom has been taken away. What advice would you give people to help them see that obstacles are something we should embrace rather than reject?
I'm always of the belief that you gather facts, and ultimately it's those facts from incredible people that will arm you with good knowledge, and then help inform your decisions, and not just your decisions for your personal freedom and expression, but this is a country that's built on a sense of responsibility to the collective as well. And I think once you're armed with those facts, once you're able to think about the way in which we respond, I think that we can suck it up, and we can actually do our part, be patient, and be kind to people, and support the whole, and knowing that we made a difference by doing that, and paid a small price in a short period of time. I also think it's important, though, to recognize that that there are different degrees of suffering in this pandemic in so many different ways. People who have unfortunately perished, their families, who are mourning and grieving, and those that have gone through an illness that has continued to haunt them, those that have been losing their jobs and their hopes and their dreams, and people with disabilities. They say that it's when you're in a tragedy or a crisis that it makes you really see where your country is on the values and the aspirations of the Canada you want. And the interesting reality is that seniors and people with disabilities were the frontline platitude and statement that we won't leave you behind. And over 4 months later, people with disabilities were the very last of the relief side of the phase of the pandemic to even receive the practical acknowledgement that they had extraordinary costs and the burden of health and social and economic considerations of disruption. And I think it just goes to show that we still have a long way to go to get the issue of disability on the radar, and to respond at the magnitude of the importance of how many people it affects, and how profound it is in our health and our social and our economic fabric of Canadian society. And so still more work to be done, and let's just make sure that we do our best, because at the end of the day, having hope that we'll get through this, it won't be forever, and there's lots of always positives in adversity that we can reframe on. And the lessons of Stan Strong and Terry Fox can apply to each one of us as we face challenge and disruption, and we look to blessings and learnings and opportunities to go forward. So we'll get through it, and this will be one of those moments that Canadians will look back, and I think will feel proud to be Canadian, and how ultimately our country has responded.
Well, it's a great answer, and you're doing such great work. What's the best place for people to learn more about all of the great things that you're doing right now?
They can look us up at rickhansen.com, our foundation website platform, and they can look up the work that we're doing to help inspire youth to be champions of building an accessible and inclusive world. or to help us, continue to spread the word on our certification program, or to even think about volunteering or learning more and spreading the word on the awareness side. We need an army of challenging and competent and passionate people who want to continue to remove barriers. You can't get there alone.
Well, listen, we talked 2 years ago. It was an amazing conversation, and you were so gracious. And I'm thankful to and blessed to see that you haven't changed in 2 years. So
thanks for the enhanced digital imaging.
I want to thank you so much for taking the time and talking to us about all these great things that you're doing, and just the opportunity to talk to someone who I consider to be a national treasure has been great. Thank you so much, Rick Hansen.
Well, I'm honored. Thank you.
This episode has been brought to you by the National Advertising Challenge, North America's only brief-based challenge that sends winners to Cannes, France.